Hi and hello, watch fans, and welcome to another episode of The Real Time Show with me, your friendly neighborhood watchmaker, calling in all the way from Dresden, Rob Nuds, and my co-host, Alon Ben-Joseph, all the way in Amsterdam. Today, we are going to be reviewing one of our favorite watches in the industry, actually, the Bvlgari Serpenti. I've spent some time with the watch. I had it for a few weeks, and I wore it to a couple of events, and I have been gathering questions along the way. So we're going to look into our mailbag today, and we're going to chop up exactly what it is our community wants to know. Alon, welcome to the virtual studio.
Thank you so much. Good to be here. It's cool to do another review episode again. So for our listeners, this is not a joke. Rob really rocked the Serpenti on his wrist at different events. And there are even pictures roaming the gram, so you can even find proof of it.
I know maybe people would raise an eyebrow at the thought of me wearing a bicolor diamond-studded snake watch, but to hell with those people. This is a wonderful item, an incredibly well-made and beautifully conceived product, a gorgeous watch to wear, a lot of fun, and a real conversation starter, certainly on my hairy wrist. But let's get into those specifics right now. We'll start off the show with a question from Christopher. We have a lot of Christophers in the group, as you know, but this is our central Christopher, our most active Christopher. And he says, will they ever make a bigger version without diamonds? Now, obviously, Alon and I have spent many years petitioning Antoine and Fabrizio to design just such a watch because we think that the Serpenti should maybe be presented to a broader market. There's nothing to stop a man from wearing the watch I just wore, but it is something that we are quite keen to see. So keen, in fact, I spent the last week drawing up designs specifically with a completely new bracelet and a very novel crown system that I'll share with you, a design that I am going to submit to Bvlgari and suggest that they make. So watch this space. Alon, what would you like to see from the Serpenti family?
Before I answer that question, proof is in the pudding. I've been interviewed once by my dear friend Sophie Furley, who today writes for World Tempest, and they did a special female edition. I believe it was GMT magazine, one of their daughter companies, and she went around and asked male watch nerds what watch they would wear if they were a woman. So when she asked me to give my answer for that interview, I didn't even need to think twice. In a split second, I said I would wear a fully blinged out Bvlgari Serpenti Misterioso. So the movement is hidden in the head of the serpent, and then it's a multi-coil one. It's the high jewelry one, fully set with gemstones. So no doubt about it. Now, when you proposed the idea to do a review about this watch, the first thing I asked you is, what female is going to wear it? And you're like, me. So I started laughing, but then I stopped laughing because I knew you were serious. And you're dead serious about the drawings. So I've seen some ideas that you put on paper. Love them. I would go full titanium and go in the style and color codes of the Bvlgari Octofinissimo. So gray on gray, ton sur ton. That's, I think, the way I would go. The other one, which would be very cool, is full black ceramic. And fun fact is they already made versions in steel and ceramic, and even full ceramic one for ladies with red gold accents. So that would be my answer for Christopher.
I don't know how much attention you were paying to the pictures of the drawings I sent to you, but I 100% agree. I have actually called the watch the Bvlgari Octo Serpenti, and the head is 8 sides, so it's a stretched out octagon. It is matte titanium with some polish elements, actually. I did think that would be interesting to bring a little bit of light into the design. So I changed the shape of the links on the bracelet to make them more aggressive and interlocking. So right now, the links on the bracelet are actually just straight. They're very unfussy, very functional. It does allow, which is possibly why Bvlgari have done it, for a very tight curl around the wrist, because obviously the bigger the link, the more stepped your flexibility of the bracelet will be, and it won't be quite so smooth against the wrist. So perhaps that's why they've done it. But I made the links more aggressive. I made them matte blasted titanium, but polished like the very, very fine edges of them so that there's like just this light in between each link, like that sparkles a little bit without the need for diamonds. And I couldn't agree more. I think that you're absolutely right. The first thing you said to me when you saw my first draft was you should make the bracelet a bit thicker. And I took that on board and I have made it thicker. And I actually have integrated a crown. You will be surprised when you see this. It's a hidden crown. So you set the watch by rotating the head, and then the watch clicks back into the bracelet. So the last link of the bracelet is actually a hidden crown. It's a novel design. It has required me to think quite carefully about how a watch like that would be constructed and still be water resistant. But I think I've cracked it, and I can't wait to see what Antoine and Fabrizio make of it. They may, of course, be working on something like this behind the scenes anyway, but as far as we know, this is our baby that we are doing our best to push forwards. And I can't wait for the day, Alon, that you and I both turn up with our self-designed Bvlgari Octo Serpenti models in full titanium.
Imagine that. And crazier stuff has happened, so maybe, who knows? Dreams are healthy.
They are. And, whenever we have spoken to Antoine about it, he's not said never. He smiled wistfully, looked into the distance, didn't quite give the impression that he was working on something like that, but maybe that the conversation had been raised many times and was something that kept coming back up. And I'm not surprised that it does. I don't blame Bvlgari for not having done it already, by the way. I don't think that it's crazy that they haven't. I think that it would be crazy to do it, but it would be so crazy cool, they should. So don't get me wrong, I don't think that this is a stupid thing that Bvlgari have neglected to do. Quite the opposite. I think they probably think in-house a lot like we do that, oh, this would be awesome, but is it going to be commercially viable? Is it going to be something that will hang around in the collection for a long time? Is it going to make sense to the Bvlgari consumer? I think the answer is actually, it'll be commercially viable enough. I think people will buy it. I think that it is an absolute home run marketing tool. I guarantee you will get people like Tiny Temper or Jay-Z or even Michael Jordan wearing something like this, I think the really cool guys in the public eye will go for it, and I think it'll become like really cool. I would just say produce it and then don't make too many of them, maybe 300, 500 pieces a year, something like that, and don't just market it at men, because this is another thing. I was talking to one of my female colleagues, actually, you know her as well, Lauren from Watches of Switzerland. She was wearing it for a bit at Watch Pro because she absolutely loved it. And it went with her stack, her bracelet stack, and looked insanely cool on her. She would also wear a titanium one. There's no reason, of course, why this has to suddenly be male, where the current Bvlgari is pitched as purely female, right?
Very right. You just gave me an intro to my follow-up question to you, because I've actually not asked you this, what the feedback was while you wore it. So before you do so, I've sold many Serpentis in my lifetime, but unfortunately less than 1% is actually male. And I emphasize, unfortunately, that person that bought the Serpenti that's in that 1% is, let's call it gender fluid-ish, okay? So it's mostly women. Now, what were the responses when they saw you with your manly, hairy arms wearing this?
Yeah, not to sound too self-aggrandizing, but as you know, and as anyone that knows me will be aware, I do have quite a, I would say, typically male form. I'm short, I'm 170 centimeters tall, I'm very broad, quite big up top, and I have quite wide forearms, thanks to a misspent youth in the gym, in case anyone's wondering, and narrow wrists, weirdly enough. Although the forearms have always enabled me to get away with bigger watches than you would think a 16.5 centimeter wrist would be able to carry off. But these forearms are also quite hairy. And it was a concern that it would just look cartoonish on the end of my arm. However, it didn't look ridiculous. I can't really explain why, other than to give credit to the watch as an object. So you know that I love the Serpenti. You know that I think it's actually the best thing in watchmaking. And I really, really believe that if we wanted to show, I always say an alien, the best example of like human culture, the Bvlgari Serpenti is right up there. And therefore, it could probably look pretty good on anyone's wrist. It's nothing to do with my wrist that made it look good. But the main feedback that I got to wearing, and let me just quickly find the reference number of the model I had on my wrist, it was reference 102098, hours and minutes, quartz movement, steel and rose gold, water resistant to 30 meters, black dial, and I wore the large version of it, which isn't particularly large, it's just larger. There's two sizes, small, which is 135 millimeters, and then large, which I guess probably went up to about 160, 165. It was just big enough to be worn on my wrist. The feedback was incredible. Guys seemed a little intimidated by it in two ways, actually. One, they seemed a bit uncomfortable initially that I was wearing a woman's watch as far as they saw it. I was wearing jewelry, I guess. And the look in their eyes was almost like, I don't know, being a straight white male. It's not a look that I've seen very often in my life, but they recoiled a little bit in suspicion, I think, is what I saw in their eyes. And I quite enjoyed that, to be honest, because the other level of intimidation, and this was something that the females commented on, was that it was an extreme alpha power play, basically to openly be wearing a woman's watch. I find it amusing because I didn't find it like, I didn't feel bold or like, particularly cool when I put the watch on. I wasn't trying to ruffle any feathers. I just love the watch. I don't really think about stuff like that. And maybe because I am not used to creating such a stir from a fashion perspective, I didn't expect that would happen because it wasn't a feeling I'd ever had before. I've always taken quite a lot of care about the clothes I wear and the way I dress, and that's always been something people would know me for, I think. Even when I was a younger man, I would frequently turn up to the pub, and I mean the roughest, nastiest pubs you could imagine, in a suit, because I liked the way suits look. I thought it was cool. I was really into that culture at that time in my life. I've moved away from it a little bit now, but it was always something I took very seriously. But I was always subscribing to the norms. I didn't ever lean away from that. I am not the kind of guy, lamentably so actually, that could wear like pearls like Harry Styles or a dainty little cardigan. It just doesn't suit me. But this watch is the closest I've ever come to that kind of androgynous approach or cross-dressing either. And I loved it. I was really amazed by the attention that I got. The frequent thing people said, and it's a common thing to say these days, so I think it's all right to say it on air, but that it was a lot of BDE, so big dick energy, basically, is what I was getting from the people observing this watch. They were like, wow, that takes some balls. And I was like, it didn't take me any balls to wear it at all. But it's interesting to see the effect it has on people when they see a man, a traditionally masculine man, wearing that watch. And I have to say, it was a real hit with the women. I don't want to overplay this too much, but it was the most attention and interest that I have garnered personally from females I didn't know prior to meeting them at this event with this watch on my wrist because of a watch. No woman has ever walked over a bar and battered her eyelashes at my Breitling Aerospace. I've got plenty of middle-aged blokes who have come over and said, oh, cool, that's the Everest Skydive edition. Wow, let's have a beer together. Not really what I was going for with the watch, but whatever, very nice. The Serpenti, it's got sex appeal. On a man's wrist, I don't know what to say. It made me hotter. I felt hotter. I felt hot, and I never really feel hot. Like, honestly, I felt cool. And I was always like, and I'm not used to that. I always am a bit embarrassed by myself. I feel like I have an awkward build, and I'm very inelegant, and I shamble and shuffle around, a slight limp from too many injuries over my life. I don't walk into a room and think, hey, ladies, the big dog is here. But I have to say, as arrogant as it sounds, it's the truth. I started to feel a bit like that throughout that night because the attention was just undeniable. It was something I'd never experienced before. I'm going to shut up now because I'm making myself blush. I apologize.
You don't only make yourself blush, but also me and the listeners. But to give you a compliment, you have above average sex appeal because when I hang out with you, I'm a good wingman for you. So I see it in real life what's happening. But you are so right that the Bvlgari Serpenti is sexy. It has sex appeal as a watch. And let's quickly dive into the history before we jump to the next question, because Bvlgari is celebrating the 75th year of the Serpenti collection. A lot of people think that it's 1 or 2 decades that exists and that it's a fashion item, but it definitely is, because I dare to say that if something is already 75 years in the collection with little iterations, it's iconic. And we had that discussion on air, what is or what isn't iconic in watchmaking. But if we take it even deeper or longer, the serpent has magical status. Just think of biblical times. Adam and Eve, apple, and a serpent. Think of Cleopatra. But if you Google what the symbolism is of serpents and snakes, they're negative ones. Think of death, poison, etc. But also, in the old days especially, it represented fertility and creative life force. And that maybe is the best summary you can give this watch, because that's basically what you were saying. It gave you life force when you wore the watch.
I mean, that's incredibly poetic, but absolutely nailed on. It's a wonderful way to describe it. And I will put my entire career and reputation, whatever's left of it, on this statement. The Bvlgari Serpenti is an icon. There is nothing like it. There is no other watch that holds a candle to it in its field, in my opinion. But I strongly believe that opinion. I believe it even more strongly after having worn it. I would love to work with Bvlgari on designing a titanium Octo Serpenti. I would love to. It would be a dream. It would be the crowning achievement of the real-time show. If we could sit in a room with the great Fabrizio Buonamassa Stigliani and talk to him on eye level about what we'd like to see, and it came to fruition. I could not imagine being prouder or happier. But the truth of the matter is, I'm already on Chrono 24 looking for a vintage Serpenti for myself now, or a pre-owned Serpenti, should we say. I'd love to get a vintage one. I actually didn't know it was 75 years old, Alan, so thank you for that.
While I'm listening to you, I kept on Googling, and I went to the famous Wikipedia, and they even continue. In some Abrahamic traditions, the serpent represents sexual desire. So, Rob, there goes. According to some interpretations of the Midrash, the serpent represents sexual passion. And finally, in Hinduism, Kundalini is a coiled serpent. So there goes. Rob, you definitely need to get one, even before the one that is produced that you've designed. Going from there, and listen, who made it really famous? Obviously, Elizabeth Taylor in 1962. That's when it became mythical in, let's call it, pop culture. Well, enough about that. Hannah, one of our dear female TRTS network members, sent in a question, and she asks, what do you think about it being a quartz movement? I.e., wouldn't be it nice to add a mechanical movement to such a high-end watch? So, Rob, maybe you want to reply, but the fact is, 2 years ago, Bvlgari launched a in-house proprietary developed and manufactured caliber. It's the Piccolini, I think is called. So today it exists. Am I right?
It does exist. Yeah. And Hannah raises a good point there. And it's another question that really we should apply to this whole male-female issue that we discussed at length with Scarlett about the designing of watches for men or women, or just to design good watches. Now, I think general consensus would be that male watches tend to be more mechanically oriented, not just because of their size, but also because it's always been seen as something that men traditionally buy into. You know, guys love things that work. They love machines. They love taking cars to pieces, building Lego, building Connects or Technic or whatever. They love these construction things, but it's becoming more and more obvious that women love these things too. And, when we were kids, we were all bought very gender-focused toys, and now I see there's far less specificity when it comes to buying toys for children, which I think is only a good thing. And would it be nice to combine the Serpenti with a mechanical movement? Yeah, it would. But if I'm being totally frank, from a personal perspective, I love quartz, and I think that quartz has a place in watchmaking, and I actually think that it's time for a second quartz revolution. Not a crisis, we've had enough of that, thank you very much, but a revolution where quartz is given its rightful place as an extremely fascinating, I use my special word again, fascinating technology. It is a wonderful, beguiling thing. It's an incredible achievement, and it's diminished too often because the technology now is so cheap to produce. People don't give it the same credo it deserves, but certainly not the same as mechanical watches. But I think that if there was ever a watch that uses quartz well, aside from the aforementioned aerospace, it is the Bvlgari Serpenti. I personally do not desire a mechanical Serpenti, and full disclosure, the watch that I'm designing is quartz. In fact, I can't really reveal this in too much detail because it's a little esoteric to the design itself. It is necessary for the quartz movement to be used for the design that I am working on because of this hidden crown function. And the main reason for that is because it requires a dead date position, just like the Archinaut pentablock crown requires a dead position, which means you can't manually wind Archinauts to relocate the crown into its position. So they are automatic watches that you need to shake them to wake them, as we say, the old like Seiko models that didn't even have a manual wind position. It's the same kind of concept there. Because I'm trying to create a hidden crown in the bracelet, effectively, it requires a quartz movement to make perfect sense and to always function so that it can be relocated and clicked back into the bracelet without any issues there. So I get what Hannah is saying, and I do think that the range would benefit from more mechanical options, but I do not feel that it's a weak point in general for the Serpenti. What are your thoughts on that issue?
I agree with you that we should have a second quartz revolution. And obviously we mean that in a positive sense, that we should stop bashing quartz so much. Although that being said, Rob, I do see a renaissance in quartz watch, and a positive one, because we see solar-powered quartz watch just coming back. So I think that's a cool thing. And they're creeping up into the mid-range. My newest Awake watch, the collab with Alain Silbersand, is solar-powered. Tag Heuer recently brought back an Aqua Racer. That's a solar graph. We see Cartier doing it. So I think that's a good thing. And I agree with everything you said. And obviously it helps with the slimness of watch cases, right? So I'm also in favor of that. And since for the most people that buy a Serpenti, it's not their daily beater. And it's definitely I got that watch. It go anywhere and wear any watch. So in that sense, it helps to have a quartz because you're less inclined to put this watch maybe on a watch winder. Maybe it's less easy. So yeah, I do agree with you. And thank you, Hannah, for your first question, because the second question you also sent in was comfort wearability. How much arm hair does it snag, Rob?
Good question. A really good question, actually, because that would probably be many men's first concern when looking at the Serpenti. The answer is not at all was it an issue. And there were two reasons why it was so comfortable. The first one is the finishing of the links is superb, and the tightness of their fitting is flawless. They are basically an unbroken line of metal against the wrist. They're very smooth. There is not enough space for the watch to snag. And the second reason is because of how snugly it fit my wrist. Now, obviously, this is going to come down to each individual. If you had a very, very slim wrist and there wasn't a Serpenti available that hugged your wrist as it did mine, then I guess it would move around a little bit more. And then I suppose there could be an issue. But that wasn't a problem for me because, like I said, I had the larger one, which was just big enough for me to wear. One other interesting wearability point, which actually came up in a conversation we had recently, I don't think I expanded upon exactly why your suggestion to have the snake curling round the other direction so that the face is towards you when you look at it. So like if you imagine the serpent's head, and let's call the tip of the watch the jaws, and then the base of the watch the neck. Right now, the neck is at the bottom of the wrist and the jaws creep towards the top, so they creep away from you. So you have your 12 o'clock indicator at the jaws and you have the 6 o'clock at the neck. Now, you said to me, oh, why don't you have it the other way around so that it's maybe more aggressive, like when you come to building a watch that is by its nature more masculine, more angular, more like an attack snake than like a happy little pet on your wrist. And the answer is really, really important. I have, as many people do, a pronounced ulnar styloid. Now that's the lump on your wrist, which is at the end of your ulnar bone. And it makes this hump, which can sometimes cause problems wearing certain watches. Sometimes it is a reason why certain people don't buy certain watches because that part of their wrist rubs on those watches. For me, I've actually always liked it because what it does when the watch is on my wrist is it actually lifts up the watch at the 12 o'clock. So it sort of sits slightly slanted on my wrist towards myself. So when I turn my wrist towards my face to look at the watch, it is already angled at a more readable position. If my wrist was completely flat, I would have to turn my wrist further. Not the biggest issue in the world, but, first world problems and all that. But it's actually necessary for the Serpenti to finish where it finishes because the way that the bracelet curls around my wrist and the head comes to rest beneath the ulnar styloid, so it doesn't actually sit on it at all, and it fits perfectly. I like a glove. It's absolutely brilliant how it sits, and therefore it has to remain in the same configuration. If you had the snake head curling over the ulnar styloid, that would be, I think, quite uncomfortable. So to Hannah's question directly, hair pulling was not an issue at all due to finish and fit. And to answer a question you'd raised just tangentially, it has to be the way that it is, because otherwise you would probably encounter far more wearing and comfortability issues.
Interesting. And thanks for sharing. And we actually received a question for the mailbag, which we'll deal with in our regular Q&A episode about wearing the watch over that lump, as you call it. So that's very interesting. Going from Hannah, we have 3 questions from Leopold. So let's see if we have time to do them all. First one is, both the black ceramic Serpenti Spiga Tubogas and the stainless steel Serpenti Tubogas already could pass as a men's watch. Why add another model?
Well, that's a good question. They could pass as men's watches, and to be quite frank, as is probably obvious from the conversation we've had thus far, any of those watches could pass as a man's watch if the man wearing them was comfortable with the style as it is. And I think my personal feeling in that regard is it comes down to form, really, more than anything. I feel like there is more meat on this bone and that Bvlgari could easily revise some of their existing designs. For example, like the Bvlgari Serpenti Jewelry Scagli 26mm ladies watch, for example, that one's covered in diamonds, but it has a much more aggressive case shape to it. It has a really sharp angled head, which is not too dissimilar from the design that I'm working on for the Octo Serpenti. I'd love to see that without diamonds. I'd love to see that in the collection just as it is, but with a more muted presentation. And I guess the question is, do we need any more watches anyway? Like, do we need to design new watches? There's a lot of watches out there that already exist, and there's plenty to choose from, and there's already something for everybody, I think. And I just believe that there is a little bit more that can be done here to diversify the offering, to give it a bit more broad appeal, not just to men, but also to women that love the form but don't quite find exactly the watch they're looking for within that collection. It's just a great concept that nobody else does, why not do more?
Well said. We need more watches. There is no question. Do we need more watches? We do. And Leopold, I believe, asked a rhetorical question because he is as obsessed as we are. And watches consume a lot of hours of his day. Regarding the two models that he's referring at, they're lovely, but they're not male enough. Or they're not for women that have bigger build. So let's leave maybe male or female. Should there be more Serpenti watches? I do think so. I think that platform is amazing and can be diversified even more. So my answer is short and is yes. So his second question is, what materials should, in brackets, the presumable larger Serpenti Grandi collection feature? Platinum, titanium? Should it have a Serpenti dial? If you stay in the Bvlgari materials catalog, could rubber be involved?
Well, that's an interesting one. I mean, obviously our thoughts are always towards titanium when we talk about this new watch that doesn't yet exist. We think that titanium is the obvious choice. I think merging the design codes of the Serpenti and the Octo would be a wonderful thing to see. And it's what we envisage as the best way to bring this concept to life. It's just not been explored yet, has it? I mean, we have precious metals in the collection already, and platinum, to me, yeah, it's a nice material, but it's unnecessary for this concept. I think also, if I'm being totally honest, when you design a watch, it's not just about the watch itself. Obviously, you design it within the context of the collection as it is, and also the industry. And pricing is also an issue. I think if we were to see a titanium Octo Serpenti hit the shelves at some point, then it would be quite imperative that it was an affordable Serpenti. I think that would add a great deal of strength to the offering. It would give people the opportunity to really consider it instead of other watches in the sub 10,000 category, for example. I don't think it would be a smart move to design a watch like this and then price it in a way that excluded so many people from taking that leap, because it is going to be a leap. I'm not so wrapped up in this idea that we have and this desire that we have that I've put my blinkers on and forgotten that the watch would actually have to sell. I think it has to be an affordable option. It has to be something that people can access, can aspire to own, and feel comfortable having a go with it. You know what I mean?
I do, and I agree with you, because platinum definitely is the king of metals, and there's nothing like it in the whiteness of the metal. It's hard, but you don't need it with the Serpenti if you want a Serpenti that coils. Because, fun fact, the coil inside the Tubogas is the one that twirls, is hand coiled. So Bvlgari does that in their own ateliers. So the precious metal items and the setting is done in their Italian workshops where the jewelry is made. But all their watches are made in their own manufacturers in Switzerland. And they coil them. Usually you can order Serpentis that coil in 2 sizes. So that's fun fact to know. Make sure you always pay attention to the S or the M when you order one. And the coiling is done by hand. It's almost impossible to break them. They have such a special method that there is a memory in the steel coil, the inside, where they make the links come around, which are, let's say, the scales or the skin of the snake. And so there's a lot of manual labor in there. And you can literally 10,000s of times stretch it to put on your wrist and rest. Stretch, rest, stretch, rest. And it's all done by hand. And the power of the spring, the energy of the spring stays the same. So it's very, very, very well done. To answer the last question about the rubber, could be an interesting one. I don't recall they ever made one with rubber. So it could actually be very cool.
Yeah, that's a nice one. That honestly, I'd never thought about that. I'd never really drawn the line between Bvlgari's use of rubber in the straps on some models like the aluminium collection and also previously the scuba. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some others that you might have in your mind. Maybe the Diagonos also had rubber straps at some point. I'm not sure. That would be, that would be something, I guess. I think my issue with rubber in general, although I love a rubber strap, is that it does tend to degrade over time, and it will have a shelf life that is nowhere near that of titanium or steel or any precious metal. And I think that it also is more reactive to a person's skin. So if you have maybe slightly acidic perspiration or perspire profusely generally, you'd get a shine on the rubber, which might be unsightly rather quickly. And I'm speaking, of course, from using rubber for the links on the bracelet. Maybe it could be used in a decorative way that meant that it wasn't in contact with the skin so much. Maybe it could be used for certain parts of the construction, like the neck where the head meets the case, perhaps. But I don't know. I just think it's perhaps not luxurious enough or decisive a material enough to get the most out of a Serpenti design. You got any thoughts on that one?
I do. You're 100% right, because the shelf life is, if you use natural gaucho, and I'm not even talking about silicone or the synthetic versions of rubber, it's not going to be more than 1 or 2 years. So Bvlgari needs to create a system that you literally can take off those rubber links and replace them. So, and it's going to be a pricey joke. So yeah, that's a good point. Leopold ends his triple questions with, should there be a mechanical complication where the snake rolls its eyes on the half hour? Hell yes, fantastic idea. And why not make that a collab with Urwerk? I mean, they have a collab with MBNF, so it's time for a collab with Urwerk, because they're the kings of satellites and jumping stuff. What do you think, Rob?
Well, I mean, I think it's cute. It wouldn't compel me to buy the watch any more than I am already compelled. I do think it could be interesting. I think it could be something for a GPHG entry, perhaps. I'm not convinced that it's worth it, to be frank. I think having a complication of that nature in a case size that would remain palatable might be a bit overkill. And you do raise an interesting point, actually, which we haven't discussed and wasn't on the list of questions, but worth addressing, and that's collaboration. I don't remember seeing many collaboration pieces with the Serpenti, but maybe what we're discussing here, the titanium Octo Serpenti, is a better canvas for that, because we're talking about a very muted colorway, something much more subtle than anything that exists in the collection already. And, you know, our good friend Romaric, Andre Second, could have a lot of fun with a snake, I think, on the dial. That could be pretty cool. So maybe if there was a slightly more toned down version of the Serpenti available, it would open itself up to more collaboration opportunities, not just with watchmaking, maybe even to your field of interest as a sneakerhead. I mean, that would be an interesting one. I mean, could you imagine a Michael Jordan Serpenti collaboration? That would be pretty cool, wouldn't it?
I need to think about that. But what about a Beyonce Ivy Park Adidas Serpenti?
Okay, now you're talking. I mean, that would work. That would absolutely work. It would be a cool thing to see. Like, this is what I actually envisage being the strength of the model, the imaginary model we're describing, because I think that it would allow the Serpenti to break into pop culture for a new audience. Yes, people of our generation and before have the Elizabeth Taylor reference, but now, you remember when, and I have mentioned him before because he was in my mind for this specific reason, when Audemars Piguet released the hammered Royal Oak, it had like a sort of frosted finish to the bracelet and the dial and everything. You know what I mean? It was in like all rose gold. I think they did it in all white gold or platinum as well.
Of course. It's the frosted one.
The frosted one. It's actually my favorite Royal Oak ever. And I think it was 37 millimeters. It was on the wrist of Tiny Temper. And that to me was a huge coup for Audemars Piguet. They didn't need that kind of representation, but seeing it on his wrist, a watch which again, like, had quite feminine vibes, it was quite a jewelry-esque piece in its own way, was extremely impactful, and it left that thought imprinted in my mind that we are looking at watches in too gendered a fashion. I do think that it's important to design watches for men or for women or for everyone, because I think that it's really important to identify who your target market is. I was talking to a friend of mine recently who is trying to start his own watch brand, and he gave me a pitch basically of what the brand was. I'd asked him to sort of give me the skinny, what's your vision for the brand? Where do you see it in 5 or 10 years? Who's your target market? Exactly what he's thinking. I wanted to know everything. And he came back to me with a pitch which was quite generic in that specific area, basically saying, well, we make the watches that we want to wear, but basically everybody buys everything, so there is no target market. And I was like, okay, that's actually true, but it isn't the purpose of defining a target market. When you define a target market, you don't expect to only sell your watches to that target market, because people are weird and everybody's an individual. And some people will like things that weren't designed for them. Some people will only like watches that were designed with someone like them in mind. So my point to my friend was, you need to know what your target market is, because that will inform your design and enable you to build a coherent design language for your brand. It doesn't matter if you design watches for guys that are 6 foot tall with broad shoulders and an interest in the outdoors. You're going to find some female retired art teacher that just buzzes off that design. It's going to happen. You never would have thought she'd be your customer, but she's going to buy one of your watches. One of them somewhere will. But you need to know as a brand who you're focusing on. And I think that when it comes to the Serpenti, there is an opportunity there to design a watch for a target market that isn't currently served by the products that exist in the collection. And again, not to say that people from all target markets can't buy those watches. Of course they will. But I think that changes the way you look at product development in an effective and relevant way. And so seeing Tiny Temper wearing a watch that I hadn't previously thought would be the watch he would choose was massive for me. And I would like to see the Serpenti breaking new ground in the same way on wrists that we didn't expect to see, because it just brings the whole collection, not just the new model, to a totally new audience. And that, I think, is really important.
Well said, because Bvlgari does think of that. They have recently added a young ambassador. I think her name is Zadia. I don't know her. Maybe that says it all, because I don't want to believe it, but I'm getting old. I'm becoming old. But they're not into the pop culture, and definitely not the younger ones. So I agree with you 100%.
Are you talking about Zendaya?
Zendaya, that's the one.
She's an actress, isn't she? She's I think she's dating Tom Holland, Spider-Man. She plays Mary Jane, or I don't know is she still called Mary Jane? I think she's called MJ in the new films. I don't know if it still stands for Mary Jane, but yeah, she's cool. She was in Greatest Showman as well.
So is she considered pop culture?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, she's like a style icon now, I would say. I think she's one of the more popular and respected young actresses in the world, and she looks a good fit for Bvlgari.
So then they're on top of the ball. But it's not street culture yet, and I believe that you try to tie it more to street culture, sneaker culture, etc. So I think they're on the right track. A bit of off-white sprinkling could be interesting, could create cool collabs. What do you think?
Absolutely, 100% agree. And yeah, you're right. I am sort of trying to tie it to street culture, a little bit more urban, underground, grime, hip hop. Yeah, why not? Like, I think the Bvlgari Serpenti is that cool, and it is that special a piece. It would appeal to that section of pop culture. I really, really do. 100% believe it.
Rob, I suggest we round it up. Final thoughts.
Well, I'm hugely impressed. I loved it before, as we know, And I didn't go into this review with a totally open mind, I guess. I went into it excited to finally get the chance to wear a watch that I'd respected as a watch for a long time. But I was blown away by the reception to it on my wrist. I was completely confuddled by the popularity of it. I honestly have never worn a watch, like I said, that garnered so many positive comments and made me feel different about myself in process. I would recommend it to anybody, and I mean anybody. Try it. Go down to your local Bvlgari dealer, get one on your wrist. If you have a friend that owns one, ask very kindly if you can borrow it for a little while. Just experience it as an object. It's something extremely unique, and we know that word is overused, but it's totally relevant here. It's wonderful, and I can't wait to see what Bvlgari does with the collection. I think that as a brand, they are extremely well managed and they are on a good way. And even if we never get the chance to create our dream Serpenti with them, I am sure that in time they will tick all those boxes themselves and keep wowing us with this incredible line, which in my mind has no peer.
I did not have the balls to rock it outside of my four walls of my boutique, but I've tried on many. I had the honor to obtain and sell one Mistriosi fully set this year, and I've spent more than an hour with it. Stunning piece of art, and you're rightfully so, Rob, to say that this is unique, because in jewelry you'll find other jewelry makers make Serpenti jewels, but nobody makes Serpenti watches. And I don't dare to call it that it's a forgotten piece or an understated piece, but I believe it should be up there, especially for women, as an iconic watch. So the to-go-to watch usually is a Cartier Tank for ladies, Rolex Datejust. And I don't think the Serpenti would make the top 5 or top 10 in their minds or their short or long list. And I think it should be up there. It's fun, it's elegant, it's luxury, it's well made. Yeah, I'm a huge fan.
There we have it. Thus concludes my favorite watch review episode that we've ever recorded for the Real Time Show. They're not as frequent as we maybe imagined they would be when we started the show, simply because the feedback we received from the community was that the Q&A sessions are by far and away the most popular format that we produce. But I absolutely loved test driving this watch. Thank you to Bvlgari. Thank you to Chiara for sorting it out for me and letting me keep it for so long. It's now on its way back to Munich, where it originated. But I hope that I will have another one on my wrist very soon. If you would like us to review any watch in the industry, please just get in touch via the usual channels. We have our dedicated Instagram handle now at therealtime.show, but you can still contact us directly, either ROBNUDDS for me or ALONBENJOSEPH for Alon, via email, either Rob or Alon at therealtime.show, or via the contact form on the website, www.therealtime.show. Thank you for listening. We'll be back soon with some more top quality watch content. Until then, stay safe and keep on ticking.